Premier Protein is perfectly positioned to take advantage of changing consumer behaviors because of COVID-19, or is it? In this video, I will cover the recently filed BellRing Brands, which is the owner of Premier Nutrition and a few other brands. I will be covering their recent fiscal year 2020 quarter two earnings. I'll be using that as a backdrop to discuss what the holding company's kind of major consumer brands, how they will do within the face of the COVID-19 retailing environment. Just as kind of a short summary, BellRing Brands is a holding company that owns several consumer brands that maybe you're aware of. First one being Premier Protein, that is the star of the holding company. You also have Dymatize Nutrition. You have Powerbar, which is kind of an old legacy name, Supreme Nutrition, which you don't see too much of anymore, and then Joint Juice. Now let's just kind of start at top line revenue numbers here. The net sales for the fiscal year 2020 quarter two was $257.5 million. That was up 18.9% year over year. Actually also up 5.5% sequentially on a quarter over quarter basis. So very strong numbers for BellRing Brands as a portfolio. Jumping into sales by brand, you actually had Premier Protein, which had net sales up 25.8%. They had volumes up 27.1%. Some of the reasonings why they were talking about volume increases was around pantry loading effect that talked about in numerous videos around COVID-19 and some of these consumer packaged goods brands that happened in the mid of March. You really saw everything kind of spike up to the point of sometimes triple digit year over year growth. You also had distribution gains that helped out Premier Protein. And then there was some incremental promotional activity that happened in the first half of this quarter that did help improve some of the volume increases on Premier Protein as well. Now, Dymatize Nutrition, kind of the other big part, much smaller than Premier Protein, but a considerable portion of BellRing Brands. You had net sales that were down 2.4%. They did have a volume increase that was up 1.1%. So you have to assume that the issue is on the pricing side. They did note that there was strong e-commerce sales, but that was offset by some issues with international sales losses and specialty channel sales losses. Now, Powerbar has been a little bit of a mess lately for BellRing Brands. Their net sales were down 19.7%. That volume was down 26.6%. There's actually a very big SKU rationalization that's happening on the US side. And there was also issues internationally, which is where most of the sales of Powerbar does now. They were saying that also had some volume decreases. Now, moving into like a sales by product perspective, protein RTDs, which is vast majority of it made up by Premier Protein, that is 82% of the sales for BellRing Brands. That's actually up 7% year over year. You had powders, that is 12% of the revenue, the total sales. That's down 3% from the fiscal year quarter of 2019, but it was slightly up on a year-to-year basis. You just had such an increase on the protein RTD side that their share of the pie of total sales was lower. You had nutrition bars, which is only 5%. A lot of that is attributed to Powerbar's loss of sales. It's down 3% year over year. And then kind of the other category, which is at 1%, and that's down 1% year over year. Now, looking at product innovations, new products that has come out across BellRing Brands, ones that they've kind of noted. On the Premier Protein side, they have cafe latte flavor that they launched recently, and that's now become the second most popular flavor within their repertoire. They also launched a protein with oats product, specifically for kind of the use cases around breakfast. And they're seeing that that is off to a really good start and is actually performing in the top 40% of similar products where it is sold. Though COVID-19 is creating some issues across innovation pipelines, product development pipelines across all consumer packaged goods, you have to look at the risk profile a little bit differently. You have to look at overall just what is happening around you and does it make sense. BellRing Brands is kind of saying we are continuing with some of our innovation cycles. We are still looking at launching those throughout this because of the strong performance of our brands, specifically Premier Protein. They're looking at like liquid specific goals with kind of incremental consumers, incremental need states, and then also incremental occasions. So that's kind of where they're focusing their innovation pipeline. If you want to look back at some of the ideas that I have talked about with Premier Protein, BellRing Brands, and innovation, there's a number of videos on my channel that does go into some of the predictions or assumptions that I've had around their product innovation pipeline. Now, jumping into some commentary around like sales channels with BellRing Brands, they did highlight a few things on the earnings call, specifically around some of the newer channels that they're putting a ton of focus in right now. They've done extremely well in club, but they are trying to round out their sales channels right now. So they did see 79% growth in the food channel, so grocery stores. They also had 84% growth in drugstores and drug channels. So both of those have gotten a ton of distribution gains. A ton of new accounts are stocking Premier Protein drinks, and that's why those numbers have increased extremely strong. And just to give us a peek into next quarter, Darcy Horn Davenport, the CEO of BellRing Brands, did kind of give us a little bit of what's happening on those channels in April. So you had the food channel, grocery stores up 31% year over year. You also had the drugstore channel up 18% year over year. Now, I want to talk about the advertising that BellRing Brands has done. I don't tend to talk about these types of things on videos, but when there is something that is important to highlight because they're taking a big risk or I'm seeing something in the market that's really working well, I want to make sure I highlight those things. So BellRing Brands actually had their first national TV campaign that launched in January, and that was to reach the New Year's resolutionist type of consumers. They were really kind of focusing in on that on a national TV campaign, and they're really kind of happy with the results on that. They're saying that there was over 1 billion impressions, which can mean something, can not mean something. But going down, they said they did experience increases of awareness, dollar share, website traffic, but most importantly, they also have seen a household penetration number go up on the Premier Protein drinks from 5.3% to 6.6%. So they're talking about this is a big win and they want to continue to do this. They obviously have to change a little bit of the messaging and things around this because we're past New Year's resolutions, but they want to continue with the TV ad campaigns going forward. But right now, because a lot of the attention is on digital and on social and be it the stay-at-home orders of COVID-19, a lot of people are consuming a ton of content. They are shifting a lot of their advertising budget to digital right now and specifically towards social media right now. And they're saying that is providing them a huge amount of benefit to their e-commerce sales, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this video. But if you consider like that, the products that BellRing Brands sells, and specifically if we're talking just like Premier Protein, you have convenient nutrition products, which are sometimes also called on-the-go nutrition. And there's not much on-the-going that is happening, especially in the quarter in which we are talking about the earnings report. So how is this category going to do overall? You did have BellRing Brands leadership team talking about the Nielsen report around category growth still happening in the quarter of about 6.5%. And then within like the liquid subcategory of convenient nutrition, they are seeing a 11% year over year gain. So they're still saying this is a very strong category, regardless of some of the issues that you're having with COVID-19 and stay at home and people not really doing things on the go. They kind of further, reiterated that just like most of the consumer packaged goods categories, food and beverage categories, you saw a huge spike with kind of the pantry loading that happened in March. Then you're having a little bit of a kind of like a deloading or reduction of just purchasing that's happened in part of April, but that is still above people would purchase pre-COVID-19. So though they're not at that astronomical growth level that we saw in the peak of the stock up, it is still settling above the average from the trailing 12 months before COVID-19 happened. And also mentioned around, if analysts or things that are kind of trying to peek into Nielsen reports and trying to see that maybe there's some sales losses or pull that's being a little bit lower in April and maybe into May as well. They're saying, hey, remember, Premier Protein is still 50% in the tracked channels that you could see on Nielsen and then 50% non-tracked channels. So though there might be some channel shifting that's going on, they're still seeing consumption that's staying pretty consistent. And through some of the research that they've been able to do and also from other firms, they are saying that like 64% of convenient nutrition products, specifically RTD protein drinks, are actually consumed at home. And then there's another 14% that's consumed at work and school. So if you think about how home is now work and home is also now school, that provides them somewhere around 80% of use cases that are still applied. So the other 20% is mostly from like commuting, traveling, and around like your fitness moments at the gym or something like that. So they still feel very confident that they're positioned extremely well for this environment, regardless of if the restricted living situation does extend into the back half of their fiscal year. Now, making some note around digital sales and e-commerce and how they are shifting some of their advertising budget to digital and being a lot more active there. They did see e-commerce grow 150% year over year in the quarter, and they actually has seen that accelerate into April at 200% year over year. So this is now becoming a very strong piece of their business. They noted that it's about 10% of the total sales now comes from digital sales. They do not see this as going away. They see this extending, they see this growing, and they're going to continue to focus a lot of their attention on the e-commerce channel, the digital shelf. Now, I want to kind of briefly shift into some of the risks, potential risks that COVID-19 is kind of having on BellRing Brands and specifically Premier Protein. You have some input costs and production risk. Milk as a whole, the commodity as actually the prices went down, and I think that the actual dried protein element should also go down, but right now it's not really happening. And I think that's because just demand of the product is still very high globally. So you're not really seeing, it's actually decoupling. It's not going in that direction. BellRing Brands is saying we're anticipating this to continue to stay high, but they're saying into next year, they believe this should start to come down a little bit. But that's a big kind of risk for BellRing Brands and specifically Premier Protein because of needing those protein inputs for their product. They're saying overall the supply chain though is strong. They're not having issues finding any inputs. They're not having any issues with some of like the Tetra Pak shortages that maybe you've heard in the market. That is not happening with Premier Protein. They're not having any issues with line times or anything with their manufacturers. They do have an issue with that they are overexposed with one specific contract manufacturer and one specific facility within that contract manufacturer. So if something happened from a COVID-19 perspective, like a health perspective, and they had to close down that facility for a period of time or for whatever reason, that comes offline, Premier Protein would be in probably a pretty bad issue for a little bit of time, depending on how long that lasts. So that is something to kind of pay attention to because they are very overexposed in one area with their manufacturing. There was a question, something that I've constantly am kind of pondering with some other categories within consumer packaged goods. There was an analyst on the call that asked a question around private label, and if there was any concern that private label is going to take market share. There has been some increases of total share of private label within convenient nutrition products. So I kind of asked that question to see how leadership at BellRing Brands was looking at private label. It is traditionally like lower than a lot of other categories of private label. You have it somewhere around like 7 or 8% of convenient nutrition is private label. And I think on the liquid side, maybe that's 8 or 9%. So it's very small, especially when you consider some other kind of consumer packaged goods categories. But With the recession that's already taking shape and it's definitely going to last a bit of time, you start to have behavioral patterns that shift into trading down within some of the consumer packaged goods categories. And if there is more retailers that are offering, say, a private label, ready to drink protein, you might have some consumers that would look to trade down, maybe spend $1 or $2 less a package for that. But BellRing Brands overall, they're saying Premier Protein, that the brand is very strong. They have a 50% retention rate, reorder rate on the product. They think that will combat any issues with increasing amount of private label or any of kind of the market conditions, economic market conditions. They're saying if you look at Costco has private label products, and they've extended a lot of their gains in Costco since they've had that private label product. So they think they're going to be able to combat if any other of the retailers that they're strong in does start to come out with private label. They are noting some of the flavor things as well, because most private labels are like chocolate and vanilla, and Premier Protein has a ton of different flavors that would attract a number of different consumers. And just to kind of round out this video, I want to talk about the balance sheet strength of BellRing Brands. It's been kind of a trend with some of these videos around COVID-19. It's important because these businesses do need to sustain a uncertain time right now that has a lot of risks. A lot of them are pulling their guidance because there's so much uncertainty in the market right now. So just taking a look at BellRing Brands and their balance sheet, the majority of BellRing Brands is owned by Post Holdings. I think 71% of the shares are owned by Post Holdings, which does kind of provide them with some new options, different options that would be available to them that are a little bit different than maybe other businesses, other competitors. So just kind of note that, but that's called last case scenarios. You don't really have to worry about that too much. But just looking at BellRing Brands as a singular entity, their own entity, they did go out and just kind of borrow another $65 million on a revolving credit line that they had, a $200 million revolving credit line. And on that, as of the end of Q1, the revolver had about $80 million still left on it for them to tap if they needed that for any reasons. And then as of April 30th, so looking a little bit further past the end of the quarter, they did have a total cash and cash equivalents of about $100 million. And it's important to note, like, when some of these high growing companies are kind of tapping some of the revolving credit, it's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it's for working capital purposes. They are needing to, maybe in this specific reason, maybe they're looking to get more inventory. They need more inventory in their warehouses. They need to have more inventory at some of their partners. Their partners obviously have terms as well. So you have this cash cycle that's a little bit extended because of the growth, and you need to make sure that you are in a proper position. And then from like a debt load perspective, they don't really have anything on their books that's like significant that's happening in the next couple of years. I think their biggest one, which happened around them spinning their business off from Post Holdings, that is not due until late into 2024. Hopefully you guys got some value out of this video. BellRing Brands and Premier Protein are definitely looking at having a little over $1 billion in sales this year. Something that I've really looked at as a important kind of milestone for them, even if it really has no meaning to it. It's just kind of one of those things to be in an echelon of businesses within functional CPG that not a lot of businesses hit. If you guys have any questions about BellRing Brands, Premier Protein, or any of their other brands, please leave a comment below on this video or on any of my social media, which I have all the links down below.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to help support me, make sure you guys hit that thumbs up button on this video. If this is the first time you've been introduced to my videos, would love for you guys to be a part of my community by subscribing to my channel. I upload several videos just like this weekly. And if you guys want to connect further outside of this platform, I do include all of my social media links down below. I just want to thank you guys again for your time. Hopefully I gave you some value in return, and we'll see you guys on the next video.